Welcome to the Transfer Flow. My name is Ted Knutson. Today, we are going to talk about 5 teams in the Premier League whose fans should be a little bit concerned about the quiet, including one team that needs a giant rebuild. We're going to talk about the madness of Lyon, one of Europe's biggest clubs, potentially getting relegated to Ligue 2 and their crazy owner. We're also going to talk about 3 of the sexiest transfers from around Europe, players that look very exciting and would make their teams much better. And we're going to talk about the heat in the United States and the sex appeal of the Club World Cup. Stay tuned. So we've mixed it up a little bit today. It is me and Neel for the first time ever. And on today's show, we're going to have some transfer talk. We're going to talk about the Premier League clubs that are a little bit slow. Maybe their fans should be nervous, concerned, what's going on. And then we're going to wrap it up with the Club World Cup. But we're going to talk about it in the context of the World Cup and how people should probably be aware, and FIFA should obviously be aware of what could impact the world's biggest football event next summer based off of what we've seen so far. So let's tuck right in. We are looking at a transfer window that kind of had an early window there, and often things are announced and they kind of leak through and then they happen on July 1st, right? But we've had 2 transfer windows this summer, partly because the Club World Cup needed to open things up. And now we're going to have another one that opens up next week again for the normal transfer window. But what we're not seeing necessarily, at least out of some clubs, is any deal velocity. And my question, and one of the things we wanted to talk about today, was which teams in the Premier League are slow or seemingly not necessarily, out there getting things done. Which teams' fans maybe should be a little bit concerned. Neel, I know you have some thoughts.
Yeah, so I was just looking through all the transfer business and rumors from the Premier League so far, and I came up with a few teams who haven't done a lot for various reasons. So I think we'll start with one where there probably should be some concerns and questions asked, and that's West Ham. So, they've obviously had, a few a difficult seasons certainly last time around, not just with coaching changes, but also behind the scenes a lot going on. Technical director Tim Steidten having quite a publicly well-reported fallout with David Moyes, both of them leaving in the end, Graham Potter coming in, and it's quite a mess. Transfermarkt has a staff page where they have a bunch of coaches, scouts, everyone, and they also have a management section. Do you know how many people West Ham have in their management section right now?
Tell me.
It's a grand total of 1 person. And
Who's that?
is Mark Noble, their sporting director since 2023. Now, obviously, when he was sporting director, they also had Tim Steidten initially on a technical director role, but really he was probably the guy who was supposed to be taking care of the recruitment and transfers and all that kind of business. Noble, of course, is a club legend, but he doesn't really have a great track record in this respect.
Well, I'd say he probably has an unknown track record necessarily there. So it was clear this Titan was put in place. We did not like their transfers last summer. We thought that they overpaid for deals like Kleiman. Definitely, we hated the Fulkrug deal. Partly, and Dortmund loved the Fulkrug deal for exactly the opposite reasons. And then we've got Graham Potter who's come in now. And Graham Potter has typically worked with a gentleman named Kyle McCauley, and he's worked with him since Oostersen. So Kyle was Scottish, and he was relatively young at the time. And then they've kind of built this long-term relationship where one of them helps guide the recruitment side of things, and then Graham obviously, sort of oversees the rest of it. And Kyle was at Brighton when Potter was there, and so sort of learned from them, even if he wasn't executing the deals when Ashworth was there. And so now he's probably in a position where he's making a lot of these recruitment decisions, at least as far as I could tell. But yes, it's more than a one-person job, which is pretty crucial there. So when we look at West Ham, they clearly need to make some sales. That's one of the early things that they need to do, because that squad is very much in transition between styles. They tried some players on for size last year. It was Lopetegui that was actually overseeing things, and then could not seem to get coherent tactical style. He fell out with Steidten. Both of them ended up disappearing into the ether, and now they've got presumably a new structure that hopefully will be more stable and able to execute better. Now, they were lucky last year in that the promoted teams were so bad that they weren't in danger. But if they continued to do the things like they had before, which is overpay for old players and not necessarily find players that were going to be at least average Premier League quality or better, like they could end up in those dangerous positions. So that's certainly one. I thought another one that you mentioned, which is run by sort of a deal master, was pretty interesting in Aston Villa. So give us a scoop on Villa so far and what's going on there.
Yeah, so I mean, Villa have made one transfer so far this summer. That's young Yasin Özcan coming in from Kashim Pasha in Turkey. He's, I think, 19 years old now. He's a young defender. He has a lot of experience. I think it's close to 100 senior appearances. I remember watching him for the first time when he was, I want to say, 15 or so. So he's surprisingly experienced for his age, but I wouldn't say he's someone who comes in and immediately improves the squad. He's definitely one for the future because he's still young. He's coming in from the Super League. So for the rest of it, Villa, we know, again, do have some work to do with their squad. We saw them take on a fair few loans, especially in the January window last season, but they kind of went all in really to make the Champions
Mhm.
League.
And so close.
Yeah, and they very narrowly missed out. But now what that means, obviously, is that their upcoming revenues will be significantly lower, and they kind of have to rebudget things accordingly. So, as we record on Wednesday, the situation basically with PSR is that Villa effectively need to make about £30 million in sales before the July 1 deadline to be all good in that respect. So we might see some PSR kind of deals. Obviously, there's some rumored sales as well. Like Emi Martinez, for example, has had some rumors with like Saudi Arabia, Man United, all sorts. But they do need to first make sales, and then they can think about what they do. So I think this is one which is, I mean, I wouldn't be too concerned about. I think it's one where obviously I would be concerned about them making the sales. You probably don't get the best of deals in this kind of situation unless you come up with a cool PSR deal. But then, July 1 onwards, they're going to have some work to do to, I would say, again, kind of just add some depth to the squad. Like, I think the squad is largely decent. Obviously, you need to kind of replace the attacking pieces that you brought in last season were on loan. And obviously, you can't take that kind of a financial risk again. So you have to make some maybe better deals in that respect. But on the whole, I think their squad definitely looks a lot better than West Ham's, obviously. So I wouldn't be
I
too
feel like
concerned about it.
Villa are mostly in a spot where they need to consolidate, and they need to
Hmm.
consolidate and sort of much like Newcastle last year, like know what your best 11 look like, add younger depth behind that can develop over the next sort of 1 to 2 years. They know that they've got maybe one more year of like Watkins at a top tier level. He was rumored to be like the number one target for Arsenal, but they couldn't all three agree on both the player and the price that needed to get that executed. And yeah, beyond that, like obviously they're not in the Champions League this year. Can they backdoor into it, or are they going to be perpetual Europa League as it has happened under Emery before? But one thing we know is that Monchi loves to make deals, and we will probably see a lot of focus once the transfer window opens on bringing players in and getting rid of the other players. Obviously, when you're under a PSR deadline, though, like that's the most important thing. Like something has to happen, and that's intriguing. There's one team that you had on your list of five that I think is always quiet, and they always run like very quietly for a very long period of time, and that's another London team. But this is like sort of the forgotten London team in Fulham.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're always quite quiet, but they seem certainly have done a pretty decent job, I'd say, over the last couple of seasons. And yeah, I mean, I thought they were quite solid last season, to be honest. Their squad looked pretty good in most parts. They had a good amount of depth, good amount of rotation, and were obviously very comfortably mid-table. So again, I think they're ones where they don't really have to do a lot. I think there's some rumors about some potential fullback moves. So Kenny Tete is one who's in the air. He's, I think, just been offered a contract, but also has an
Yeah,
offer from
I think he's
Everton.
out. I think he's going like definitely going somewhere else. So they got to replace depth there.
Yeah.
They brought in some younger attacking players. Like one of the big remits for Fulham in last summer was they got to get younger,
Mm.
and they started to get younger. It does take multiple windows in order to do that, but they needed to transition a squad that was like largely sort of 28 to 33 into something that's closer to 25 to 28. The attackers they brought in seem to do pretty well. Like
Yeah.
and overall, they don't feel like they lack in quality, but
Yeah.
they don't have anybody that you're like, oh, this is a huge breakout star, or this is somebody that's definitely going to get poached in the future. They're like one step short of where Palace is right now, and I feel like if they can execute deals that make sense for them, like they give themselves a better chance. You also very rarely hear about players coming through the Fulham academy, or if they have, they get bought very early, like Fabio Carvalho, that went to Liverpool and then came back down to West London. So, but given their history, like you don't expect them to make deals very, very quickly. Like they just sort of quietly roll through the summer. I think Silva has a lot of input on the types of players that he gets and wants. You got two more on your list. Who should fans be a little bit worried that they're not hearing at least more transfer noise out of?
I'd be a little bit worried about Everton as well. They have a pretty big.
No. You should be a lot worried about Everton,
Okay.
because that squad needs
Yeah,
so much help. They were re-signing fullbacks at age like 35 to 40 effectively for last season. Like they need help.
They're doing it again. They're offering Coleman a contract extension. So here we go again.
He might be one of those ones that sort of sails off into the coaching staff, and maybe like Mark Noble becomes a sort of emeritus sporting director at some point. But there's so much work that needs to happen on that squad.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's obviously a big rebuild on hand, as we know, with just a number of like players potentially leaving, ends of contracts, stuff like that. But also there's the new ownership with the Friedkin group coming in, and yeah, it's new stadium. I mean, there's so much change, and yeah, like you haven't really heard a lot of noise, a lot of rumors. Like they've most been linked with like right backs. The Kyle Walker and Kyle Walker Peters were both on their shortlists. So I wonder how they were scouting there. But Kenny Tete was also quite strongly linked. So you're probably going to get one of them. There was a Grealish rumor, but obviously that's like, firstly, big money. And also I would say kind of nice to have addition, but you first kind of need to have a good squad in place. So that's not something I'd be too worried about right now.
They need midfielders that can actually run and do work. It's a little bit like a budgetary Man United thing. Branthwaite and O'Brien, they have giant center backs, and so maybe like you get some good set piece delivery. We know Moyes has his teams have occasionally been good at set pieces in the past. But yeah, you definitely need like younger legs. You need health. Health is a very basic thing that the squad needs, and I felt like they probably are looking at an 8-player rebuild just in this window in order to stabilize that squad. Maybe it's the thing where Moyes does like Hodgson did at the end of his career at Crystal Palace, where he's just able to like defensively solidify them enough, and they've got enough budget and enough money for like a year or two they could just turn over and then bring in another coach that has a more dynamic style in the future. But I would have some real worries this year that if they don't get younger and more players in, like they will definitely be in trouble next year.
Yeah, I mean, they also need a striker, I think, because that was not going well. You look at their strikers' numbers from last season, nothing looks great. And they've been linked with a couple of guys. I think there's been links with Nick Waldemade and Tierno Bari. Not very strong links, I would say. And also, like, those guys will be on other shortlists and radars, so won't be easy gets probably. But yeah, I think, as you said, there's a lot of work to do. And even though there's a long summer ahead still, you want to see some stuff being done, at least some stuff in the works, you'd hope, by now. So,
but they will have a lovely stadium to play very old players in, so they got that going for them.
Yeah, and I guess then the team you were referring to previously was Sunderland. And now, they also have a fair bit of work to do. I think that's always the case with these playoff winners, because especially lately where there's been like 2 runaway teams at the top of the championship, by like mid-season, you're very confident you're probably going to be in the Premier League. So you can already fully start thinking about that. Whereas a team like Sunderland, of course, that's a possibility, but there's probably a greater possibility really that you're going to be in the championship as well. So you got to prepare on both fronts. And I think Sunderland do have some talent in attack and midfield. They've also made a couple of sales, obviously, which have raised some money. So Bellingham and Watson have left for just about 40 million pounds, give or take. Enzo Lefebvre obviously has become a permanent signing. That was part of the loan deal agreed.
But that was actually a pretty substantial fee for a championship team to agree to take on, but it was only based on promotion. So it was like a $4 million or $5 million rental fee
Yeah.
effectively, which is quite large. But they knew they were locking him in if they got over the hump, and they did. So I think the three promoted teams have very, very different outlooks in this summer. I think Burnley is just hoping that they manage to scrape by. They'll do their yo-yo thing. Like they basically build a 2-year budget where one of those years is up, one of those years is down. And they're consistent in it now, even with different styles of play, which I find is kind of intriguing. Obviously, they will not be able to replicate their insane overperformance in expected goals conceded in the Premier League. It won't happen. So Burnley fans, we're not being mean to you. We're just saying that this is basically statistically impossible for this thing to happen a second year in a row. They also are in the process of signing a goalkeeper, which will allow James Trafford to go on to Newcastle. They'll happily take that money. They'll reinvest it in the squad. They'll continue improving, hoping that at some point they'll eventually stay up for multiple years. Leeds think that they can go up and stay up. And that is an expensive prospect for them, but that's their goal because that was their goal when they bought the club, effectively. Like you have the San Francisco 49er ownership coming in and saying, hey, we're going to get to be a Premier League club and we're going to stay here. And this is what they've sold their investors and their shareholders about, as well as the fans. They have the deepest, sort of broadest depth of any squad that we've seen in recent times. They were unbelievably good in the championship last year, just very, very dominant, but Burnley were very close because of that overperformance. Underlying metrics for Leeds were awesome. And then you get Sunderland, who nobody knows. You make it through the playoffs, like you know that you have a squad that looks pretty good, but might be a little bit early in being able to stay up. And for them, like they have a choice they have to make. Their ownership is technically, via extension, one of the richest ownership groups in the whole world because of who they're attached to. But whether they're going to have money available, it hasn't necessarily looked like that in the past. And so I think that those three championship teams have very different prospects coming up and also very different needs. And Sunderland, we don't quite know yet. And maybe they don't know, which is also an interesting step.
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a few reports recently. It looks pretty much almost confirmed that they're hiring Florent Gesolfi to come in and start this summer probably. So he'll be quite an interesting appointment, I'd say. He'd done some fantastic work at Lens. Obviously, last comes off Roma, where it did go so well, but there's also all sorts going on at Roma. So, tough to pin that on him. But yeah, at Lens, he did a lot of this kind of recruitment that would probably Sunderland have to do, where you're looking for value from lower leagues. So over there, obviously, Ligue 2, Belgium, places like that, even other leagues in other parts of Europe and the world. So him and Kerkez as well at Lens were unbelievable in how they brought that club up and into consistent European competition in Liga. Obviously, for Sunderland, just staying up would be almost an equivalent kind of achievement. But yeah, it's as you say, it's really tough to call at this point. But I wouldn't be like too worried right now because I mean Hisolfi hasn't even been kind of officially announced, and they have a fair bit of time. But you'd hope that once Hisolfi does come in, things start moving fairly quickly.
So Everton fans and West Ham fans, you might want to clench. Like you should be concerned. The rest of those teams, like Fulham, they're always sort of quiet and they trickle along. Sunderland have just uncertainty and a big job to do as they come on up. And Villa have a very important thing they have to do in the next 5 days, and and then they can get to the other side of that. Moving on, we have, and Kim put out some prospects for rumors and potential transfers in the newsletter yesterday. But we have some sex appeal in there, like some guys that she says make you say hell yeah. Why don't you start off with your favorite of the lot?
Yeah, my favorite, by a decent margin, I would say, is Kota Takai, the centre back from Japan, currently playing for Kawasaki Frontale in the J League. He has been a very highly rated prospect for a fair few years now. He's been a regular for Kawasaki Frontale since 2023, so that's about 3 seasons. Hasn't necessarily played, full seasons all the time. He's had some kind of absences and injury issues, but on the whole, he looks a very exciting prospect. I mean, I guess the kind of stereotype maybe with Japan and players coming from Japan is like smaller but like tactically excellent guys, who are like
He's
amazing
a
on the ball.
giant for
Yeah,
Japan. He's
exactly.
1.92 meters tall. He's huge. I've been to Japan at 1.87 and felt like I was a giant. This guy actually is for the Japanese anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, probably has to be careful where he puts his steps while running around and doesn't like trample an opponent. But he's like I
They're
said,
used to that. It's part of their movie culture.
but I mean, he's a physical standout in the league, so that's what stands out most when you watch him. He's like super strong in duels, in the air, in the ground, whatever. But I was quite impressed also by like his positioning and reading of the game as a centre back. The way and the J League is a very kind of technical and technically strong league. Like it's not like maybe what you'd think of, let's say, one of the North African leagues, for example, where there's all sorts going on. It's more chaotic. The J League is generally quite a very organized league. Teams there are all very solid, well drilled. So if you're making these kind of basic like positional mistakes, you can't really rely on just being like stronger or faster to make up for it. You have to be good at that, and Takai certainly is. He's a strong tackler as well. He's, I think, just good generally one on one, even facing an attacker, even though he's quite big and comes up against more kind of tricky attackers fairly often. And on the ball as well, he's got. I mean, his numbers obviously, as Kim says in the newsletter, are pretty good from a defensive standpoint. On the ball, he's, I would say, like more of a secure kind of passer. Has it maybe shown, some maybe the full potential, though he has shown like a good deal of like passing range, like progressive passes, both like between the lines or switches, all of that kind of stuff. So I think there's pretty much all the qualities you'd want to see from a young centre back, and it's worth noting that he is about what 20 years old, but has
Mhm.
all this experience, which is quite uncommon for Japan, where generally what you have with most players is they will go through like the school system and then the college system, and so they'll only really break into senior football in their 20s, whereas this guy has been playing since he was like 18. So he's already ahead of the curve in that respect, and looks a real prospect.
For those who are looking at this from the outside, this is a Spurs rumor.
Hmm.
It looks like it's going to be 5 million ish, maybe some extra, and I think in recent years, teams in the Premier League have become much more comfortable with Japanese imports. Teams in Europe as well. It used to be that they would just go to Germany. Occasionally, they would come to Italy as well. But there was a series of time where like you would get German teams that would then play these Japanese players. Matoma came out as a relatively young player, went to Belgium first, then came over to Brighton, and people were like, oh, looks like Japanese players actually can be good. And if you followed it from a recruitment space, you would actually see that both the men's and the women's side of Japanese football over the last decade have started to become some of the most technically gifted players in the world. Like they are creating these technical almost automatons that are incredibly impressive at what they can do with the ball in a technical way. Now, the two things that were often lacking were kind of innovation and inspiration on the fly, which Matoma and his dribbling looked like it was a new era in that, and then physicality. Because as we said, Japanese players are often quite small. This guy has the physicality. If they have more players that come through that look even similar to this, teams in Europe will be very happy to take this type of risk on that type of player. One of the other ones in the list that I was pretty excited by that we know has a team that a long history of producing top quality players for the rest of Europe is Ardon Jashari, center midfielder from Bruges, who sell one or two of their best players every single year. As we know, Milan have a need, a Tijjani Reijnders sized hole in their midfield, and actually they could upgrade on him. Is sort of our feeling there. Jashari plays differently than Reinders, so it's not a perfect thing. But anytime that you see a midfielder that kind of does a lot of stuff and particularly creates a lot in attack but can defend at some level, like that's pretty interesting and exciting, especially when they're age 22, 23 years old.
Yeah, I mean, Yashari, I think, as you said, the Reinders angle is probably, I would say, works in favor of Milan, in the sense that Yashari is maybe more of a deep lying guy, as Kim said in the newsletter, and I think that's an area of their midfield they do need kind of strengthening in. On ball quality from deeper areas, helping them progress, because I mean, it's happened with many coaches as well. But like last season, much of their attacking play was like get it out to the left side. Well, Teo Hernandez, Rafael Leao there, and they'll do something. They'll figure it out. Obviously, you got to do more if you want to compete at the top of Serie A. So I think Jashari is a step in the right direction, and I mean, quality wise, maybe tougher to assess between him and Reinders, but certainly like profile wise, he's a better fit in this squad possibly, and might give them maybe a more well-rounded team. So yeah, that could be an exciting move.
Milan are another team that have a lot of work to do on that squad, partly because it seems like in the last 2 years they've had a period of time where they've had different ideas about what constituted a good transfer. They've certainly had different voices. It's a bit like when Brendan Rodgers and Ian Graham and Michael Edwards were sort of clashing heads on recruitment, and Rodgers had his own clear idea that was a bit of a mess, and then they're trying to backdoor these cheaper players that are very high quality, but at some point, some sense has to win out.
That only works at one club, which is PSG. If you have enough
Yes,
money and leeway to
enough
do
money.
whatever the hell you want, so those guys managed to do it with Campos and previous coaches and the owners. But yeah, everyone else you gotta have some more streamlined work going on.
And at Milan, there's not infinite money and there's not Champions League money either. So
Nope.
they've got to make some real choices here. The last one on the list from the newsletter, very sexy and also potentially rumored to a team that we had predicted might go big this summer. So Andreas Schjelderup, winger, and currently playing relatively small sample size for Benfica, rumored to go maybe to Italian upstarts, very rich, posh upstarts in Como.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, hasn't really done a lot at Benfica in terms of game time, but I did watch a bit of him at Nordsjælland in Denmark, who of course have an incredible track record with young
Mhm.
players. And Schjelderup very much was one of the standouts for a fair bit. I mean, for one, he kind of stayed there maybe a bit longer than most do. Like most of the, let's say, the top talent that come out of North Zealand are, you probably get like one or two senior seasons, and then someone picks him up. He had 3 seasons, but that's also because he was, I think, 16 when he first broke through. So he moved at like, I think, 19 or so, 18 or 19. uh, I think his first move to Benfica, spent a season back on loan, and then has been there since. But this season he's only gotten rotation minutes, so as you say, we can't really read too much from that. But at North Ceylon, he was very much a key player. He played like various roles. He'd often be, I think, especially initially, he'd be someone who starts like high and wide as a typical winger, and is kind of an outlet, cuts inside, and obviously creates goals, assists. But especially in that, I think the season after his move to Benfica was finalized, we saw him in a more central role as well, kind of doing some more playmaking, having the ball go through him more. And I think that shows in just his like raw numbers. Like his best goal scoring season, he had 10 goals and 0 assists, and then the subsequent season he's got 9 goals and 6 assists. And that's when he's kind of transitioned into that different role. So I think that suggests he's got some good level of versatility. And like I said, because of how early he broke through, he's still pretty young. He's what, I think 21 years old, just turned 21 in June. So yeah, definitely some time for him to further develop, and a good versatile skill set there, I think. So someone to be excited about. And Como, of course, we know, as you say, not short of money and not short of ambition either. So they'll be very much an interesting club to follow over the summer.
Yeah, I think that they're trying to make themselves into a new icon in Italian football, and they realize that Italian football is sort of disorganized enough that if you've got some money and you've got some ambition, and they got Cesc Fabregas in as a partial ownership role in order to try and like tie him together into the club, which made it difficult for teams to poach him this last year. So yeah, they've managed to sort of get some core elements to stick around. They also invested a bunch in data analysis, like very early on. They hired StatsBomb's head of AI to do their CTO and start doing more work on using AI to find players. But that stats and data is at the baseline. But this guy understood like all the stats bomb side as well. So very, very interesting project there. And we knew that they had enough money to make some waves. This summer seems like the one where they're going to do it. In the Premier League, the one that seems closest to happen is one that people might even be a little bit bored about, but Liverpool continue to get things done, and it looks like Kerkez is going to sign, today or tomorrow. That deal seems like it's a done deal. Obviously, they got Frimpong, they've got Wirtz, they've got Kerkez. That's a great initial start from a team that won the league last year.
Yeah.
Anything else you've seen in the Premier League that was exciting?
From the recent ones, I mean, I think we spoke on Monday. We were laughing at Emi Martinez to Man United, but yeah. Apart from that, last couple of days can't really think of much. I mean, obviously there's I think going to be some big rumors potentially from France where there's a lot going on with Lyon. So maybe we quickly head over there.
So those who don't know, John Textor's football organization, Eagle Football Holdings, has been a mess and a nightmare to some extent for the teams that he actually owns and the fans of those teams. Botafogo, interestingly, have had some level of success, although this year they seem to have averaged out, but they took a scalp in the Club World Cup. They actually beat PSG in a fairly lucky game, but the results are the results. Meanwhile, everywhere else, it seems like this is a huge mess. He just agreed to sell a significant portion of his holding, in fact, all of his holding in Crystal Palace, in order to help clear the way for Palace to participate in the Europa League, because Lyon were also there and they were going to be denied by multi-club ownership rules for UEFA. Then, just yesterday,
he went one step further in clearing the way.
Well, yeah. He managed to sell his stake over to Woody Johnson over there, and then on this side, the prediction was that Lyon were unrelegatable and they were going to be totally fine. But the French league basically said, "Oh, your finances are in too much of a mess," and they were very proactive back in November, saying like, "Hey, we're actually going to relegate you." And then they appealed, and they had the opportunity to sort of fix things. And basically Francis said, "You have not fixed things fast enough. We do not have proof. We don't actually believe you," which at this point, given all the things that Textor says versus the things that actually happen, seems to start to make sense. Maybe that's the way that you should look at him. It's almost a Trumpian sort of narrative in that way. And so now they have declared that they will be relegated to Ligue 2. Now, for those who have no history in Lyon, before they were sold, they were one of the very best run clubs in Europe. And this is objectively true. They had one of the best academies. Every single year, they produced amazing players out of that academy in a catchment area that isn't huge, right? So they were like very, very well run in that way. They built a new stadium, 60,000 person stadium. That's a gorgeous stadium, one of the best examples of new stadiums in Europe as well. Aulas, quite an outspoken character, also one of the best supporters of women's football that we've ever seen. And historically, he deserves a huge amount of credit for believing in women's football before almost anybody else does or did, which is why Lyon have so many titles and continue to be one of the best women's football teams in the world. They have now sold to Michelle Kang and her sort of women's football organization that's growing up.
So,
yes, exactly. Women's football MCO. Yeah, it's all the way down. And now what you get is a Lyon that over the last couple of years has been very volatile in their results. They're no longer big in the Champions League, certainly not in a case where they would make the semifinals or the finals. And the money side of things has really started to bite into them to the extent that, yeah, they've just been like, the French are like, "No, we do not believe you. We're going to relegate you. And you can prove it to us by having a boatload of cash in the accounts of this company or of this team. Otherwise, like, you can stay down there." So given that, and given that's almost unprecedented for a team that is very large and has lots of good money, the only time I can remember something obvious like this happening would be Juve in the Calciopol League. Is there anybody there that teams should be buying, like really getting stuck in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of guys. I mean, I think we should also say that they still have the opportunity to appeal this relegation.
Sure.
So
nothing is fixed in French football, but unlike other leagues.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we know by August. But hey, you never know. You might have a team switch in midway. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously a few talents still in that squad. One guy we spoke about I think a couple of weeks ago, was Malick Fofana. Patrick and I were looking at a few alternative options to Matheus Cunha for, well, a club that was not looking to spend so much money on such a player. And Malick Fofana was very much up there in that list. In fact, I think he's probably like more comparable as Patrick did to Garnacho in just his like on pitch qualities. In that he's a very very exciting ball carrier. Definitely has already does cause chaos for defenses just when he's like running at them. Does need to work on the rest of his output. It does need a fair bit of polishing, but yeah, like he's not someone you want running at your defense. Is what I'd say. So he is obviously only 19, well, just turned 20 actually. So a very exciting young prospect in Malick Fofana. Definitely gonna be picked up. I think either way really, because I mean, obviously, even if Lyon aren't relegated, they need to sell people. That is extremely clear. That has been clear for a long time.
Unless Textor for once actually just takes all the cash that he's getting from Crystal
dumps
Palace
it.
and injects it over there,
You
which
never know.
again seems pretty against type so far for him. We actually had him on our Chelsea rebuild as a potential name, although we realized very quickly there would be too many Fofanas there and no one could
Yes.
actually keep track of them.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to even register that many in the Premier League. But yeah, there's a couple other guys.
They all have to have nicknames. It'll be like Portuguese and Brazilian football, like Fofaninho,
Fofinho.
like Grande Fofana. Yeah.
But look, I mean, there's a couple other exciting youngsters. I think another one is Ernest Nuama, who is also ex-Nordsjælland, so ties in to that. He was around with Schjelderup actually, and they were like on opposite wings, both very exciting talents. In fact, Nuama is, I guess, well, not personally, he hasn't done anything, but his transfer is partly responsible for Lyon's situation because, well, they wanted to bring him in 2023, if I recall correctly, and the French, I mean, like the Liga and the French football financial kind of watchdog said, you guys don't look great financially, so how about you don't do that? And then Textor, Textor, what he did is, all right, I'm not going to sign him for Lyon. He went to RWDM in Belgium, who were then a second tier team. He dumped their, like, by far their record fee. I think it was double or triple their previous record to sign Nuama. Obviously, loaned him straight across to Lyon. And then I think it was around 25 million euros, give or take. And then he spent that season at Lyon. And then the following season, he signed him for good for Lyon for about 28, 29 million, so a bit more. But obviously, it was a significant investment at a time when, you know, he was already being warned. They were being warned that we don't like what you guys are doing. But then he just went ahead and did it, as pretty much always, really. And now they're here. So, but Noam, of course, as I said, nothing he did personally, and I guess he's been to an extent possibly a victim of just the madness at Lyon, because I like his transfer in itself is questionable. Like, when you had Ryan Cherki, why are you getting this guy for this much money when you're in such a situation? Is something which
But at some point they were expecting to sell Cherki.
Yes, but then
and
you
he
would
ended
have
up
to
staying around an
behave
extra.
like you wanted to sell him.
Look, I got it. It's a bit like players going to Manchester United and like, are they bad players or is it just a bad black hole of bad organization? And I think that we have the answer to that one at this point, which is it's mostly just very disorganized. The same thing for Lyon. If players who are good come into a situation that is inherently chaotic, it's difficult to perform at your best. And part of the job of running a club well is to create a situation where everybody can succeed. And that in many cases is simply not happening. You give us one more name that might be on the list, and then we're going to move on to some Club World Cup.
Yep, I would say one guy who actually did do fairly well in the circumstances was George Mikautadze. He was, of course, a standout at the Euros for Georgia, but not a standout for Ajax, or a standout in the bad way that season. So then he moved on to Lyon, has 11 goals, 6 assists last season. Good underlines as well. 7 NPXG, 10 XG, so a bit of a penalty boost there, but also 4.3 expected assists. So decent stuff all round. And yeah, like, I would say he's probably a good kind of budget pickup. Not not someone who you'd want for like a top level title competing team, but for a mid table team, you'd want to look at him. He's also like 24, will turn 25 in October, so still on the younger side, and looks quite a good prospect. He's a pretty well-rounded kind of forward, can play up front, but also likes to have the ball to his feet. So likes to drift wide and kind of plays. I played often in the front too at Lyon. So he's an interesting profile in that sense. Not necessarily a line leading striker, but someone you'd probably want in a two, who gets most of the ball. But then yeah, like I said, he gets you goals, often like off carries, shots off carries, goals off carries, creates a bit, links up pretty well. So yeah, I think a decent player there, and someone teams should be looking at for what will surely not be a big fee.
Well, this is a team that was bought for €1 billion, right? And now nobody
Going
knows what
well.
they're worth. But you can look over in wine country and look at Bordeaux, a team that's basically unbuyable right now because nobody knows what the French sort of revenue model is going to look like. They're having to spin up their own media entity that could be good or terrible. Like nobody really wants to be involved with this, and like in some cases, like the political infighting has been listed, described as a nest of vipers that all hate each other, and so they can't agree on anything. So yeah, you can understand why people are reticent to spend money on clubs that have a long history in a beautiful city. Like Bordeaux and Lyon are both lovely places, but from a football sense, from a business perspective, very, very scary. Speaking of business perspective and maybe a little bit scary, we have the Club World Cup. And those of you who aren't paying attention, it's actually kind of fun.
Very fun.
It's fun for a lot. Okay, it's very fun. It's fun for a lot of reasons, partly because we never in football history have been able to connect the dots from these different clubs from all these different places and team strength. Partly because being football, we are seeing some very interesting upsets and results that are a little bit exciting. And also partly because there are elements of it that are a precursor to what we might expect from next year's World Cup in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico. The initial story about this tournament was that the South American teams were awesome. That like in the first week, maybe even the first 2 weeks, you're like, all right, just bet on the South American teams. They're going to overperform versus everything else. The second wave was sort of, the European teams don't look very good, which is kind of what we expected, right? They would be very tired coming in, very leggy, not necessarily that interested, but some of their ownership groups would like them to perform very well. And in some cases, like a Real Madrid, they want to own the most Club World Cup titles in the world again or whatever. They made some big transfers before the Club World Cup so that they could have them available during this. So City and Real Madrid both spent a chunky amount of money. A couple of other teams did as well. And now what we're seeing is sort of multifold. One, you get into this third round where there's weird incentives going on. Sometimes you're seeing completely unexpected results, partly because teams are playing their lesser teams, partly because like who knows. But the story not being discussed outside of the coaches who are very clearly making this a thing is the heat is killing the players. It is absolutely demolishing not only their output, but in some cases making it impossible for them to train.
Yeah, I mean,
have you been to the United States in the summertime?
Thankfully not, but I do live in Qatar, so I think I know a thing or two about the heat, and yeah, let me tell you, it is not fun. I mean, I was looking at the U.S. temperatures, and I was laughing at how small the numbers were, but then I was also looking at the feels like temperature, and I was like, yeah, that is not a temperature I would want to play football in. In fact, I remember I was reading about the 1994 U.S. World Cup, and even at that time, if I recall correctly, the matches were scheduled in a way to be kind of televised at a good time for a European audience. So that was often afternoons in the States. And even then, people were complaining about the heat. Even at that time, people, players included, coaches included, were like, "This doesn't seem great. This could be a problem." And about 30 years later, there is a thing called global warming, which has surely not made the situation better. So I can only imagine it'll be even worse next time around. And yeah, many places, of course, with the Club World Cup again, with the scheduling which has been another issue. They have again been playing like at noon and stuff, when sun directly above their head, which doesn't help. And yeah, it is very hot, and you can
For
see
those of
that.
you who don't care, about the United States weather, Philadelphia is quite far north, New York quite far north. This week it's gotten up to 37 degrees Celsius or around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and with the sun, right? So like when you're playing in that, if you're playing in the shade, it's hot and miserable and you want to die. If the sun is on you, it is actually somewhat dangerous. And so what we're seeing this week in this heat wave is that players are getting absolutely demolished. The two things that we've noticed historically in the gambling space when we've done analysis on temperature analysis. So that weather has an impact on gambling on sports. For I think the first place that we obviously noticed this was in baseball, where if the wind was blowing out in certain parks, like you could bet the over reliably and you would expect it to come in. Then, they started to pay attention to the weather in order to set the line and it adjusted things. People would still do it. The second thing was like snow games in the NFL or lots of wet in the NFL would cause chaos with it. In football, it's a two-factor thing. And I can tell you this because I've done some of the analysis personally, and I've also been around some of the world's largest gambling syndicates or hedge funds that have done this analysis. The first one is when it's really cold, we see goals go down. Because the ball gets harder, like players are freezing. It's tough to like generate all of the energy that you want to. You'll notice that when before teams play, if you're ever in the stadium, you'll see them sprinkle the grass with water so it's nice and slick, so the ball rolls well, it sits up. This is what players are used to playing in. When it's freezing and it's rocky and the ball bounces really hard and it's difficult to have a first touch at all, that is when we see some goals go down. And then they sort of like get to like the moderate phase where most of Europe plays football in. So most of Europe plays football between like 10 degrees and 22, maybe 5 degrees and 22. But some of them take breaks for winter time, so they're not playing in the true cold. But Europe's pretty temperate, and football only runs from the autumn through to May. Like so you miss the European heat waves. In America, you get extremes of heat because it's a giant continent. And there are, even in the northern places, as we've said, you can get to be really hot in the summertime. You can get to be very humid across all the coastal spaces as well. You get games that are delayed in MLS because of thunder and lightning, and they can be delayed for hours, which again does not generally happen in Europe. So it's just a totally different ecosystem. And then you get the battle of the time zones, where effectively FIFA wants as many European audience to be able to watch this as possible. That's where teams are sort of focused at. Asia also has its own kind of time zones. That's like usually the third in the list, but occasionally they'll move like a Spanish game or an Italian game to 11 a.m. because they can get an Asian audience in there. And when you play at noon, when you play at 3, and it's 90 plus degrees or it's like 30 plus degrees, like players are just not used to it and they can't cope. And so when it gets to be really hot, we again see temperature, or we see goal scoring come down. Like the Bayern game against Benfica, like nobody could really move. Auckland had a had a result. The amateurs had a result. I don't even know what to say about that. You're the expert in amateur football. Tell us more.
Yeah, I was just as surprised as anyone else, really. But I mean, that was actually one of the games which was interrupted, right, by a weather delay. They had a long, and in fact, when we think about that, not just for this tournament but also the World Cup coming up, that's also like a question from just the kind of competitive integrity standpoint, because this was the
Yep.
third round where you have simultaneous games, and this was also one where the two results were kind of interlinked. Now, thankfully, I guess from FIFA's perspective, Benfica beat Bayern and just got through regardless of the other result. But if Bayern were winning, then in the other game, the equation would be Boca Juniors need to win by a certain margin to go through instead. And they were just sitting and chilling while those guys were dying in the heat in the second half.
Yeah.
And then it ended, and thereafter, with Boca out already, they resumed. So I guess that's possibly one of the angles is Boca were already done, so maybe we didn't have obviously the incentive to push like the others did. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of concerns with weather to be kind of.
And I don't think it's solvable
Yeah.
unless they put like all those matches at different times, which means that you completely use the European television audience, which then sort of destroys most of FIFA's marketing model. So not possible. So basically, at the end of the day, the players are going to have to suffer for money. as they do in every other circumstance, and they're the last ones that are going to get thought of.
Yeah, like we're gonna get to watch it. So I guess we get
from
some more
from the
from
the
the
comfort of our
air-conditioned homes. We're gonna get to enjoy it. Maybe see some upsets, some more upsets, like you say. So hey, we might get some more entertainment.
Yeah,
Maybe
you
a
might
couple of
also get
them
some
pass out, but
terrible
like,
football.
yeah, that is true. You do get some extreme. I mean, yeah, like you said, the Bayern Benfica game, they were just passing it around at the slowest pace possible. They were like, "All right, guys, good night." But it was afternoon, wasn't it? So yeah, they had a long day.
Yes. So that's going to wrap us for this week. Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, 5-star reviews. Everybody tell Neel how much they love him in the comments, which happens regularly. So good for you. And we will be around a little bit choppily over the next couple of weeks as people take their holidays during the break, because, as the transfer season heats up, we're going to be here, just like in the United States heating up. We're going to be sweating and miserable, but we'll be there. So thank you for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. And tell your friends about the transfer flow. Goodbye.